Every year, the Office of the Auditor General of BC conducts the largest financial audit in the province. We audit all the ministries, crown corporations, health authorities, universities, schools, and any other organizations that are accountable to the provincial government. There's over 150 organizations. This takes 65 staff and contractors in our office over 42,000 hours to complete. And there's also 25 private sector auditing firms who work above and beyond this. Based on our audit, we report on whether the province's financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. This report summarizes our audit findings and highlights some interesting facts from government's financial statements. Here's a quick overview. For those of you not familiar with the Office of the Auditor General of BC, as the nonpartisan independent auditor of the Legislative Assembly, the Auditor General audits the government reporting entity. This consists of ministries, crown corporations, and other government organizations such as universities, colleges, school districts, health authorities, and similar organizations that are controlled by or accountable to the provincial government. The Office of the Auditor General serves the people of British Columbia and their elected representatives by conducting independent audits and advising on how well government is managing its responsibilities and resources. Finally, under the Auditor General Act, the Auditor General conducts and reports on both financial audits and performance or value for money audits. Over the next few minutes, we'll tell you a bit about 4 general areas from our report, many of which are highlighted here. First, our audit report on government's March 31st, 2015 summary financial statements. Second, the interesting story that government's financial statements tell. Third, the increased costs that must now be disclosed regarding cleanup of contaminated sites. And fourth, upcoming changes to accounting standards and what they mean for government. First, let's talk about our audit report, or opinion as it's commonly known, on government's summary financial statements at the end of last fiscal year. Our only major concern last year was around how government recorded certain types of revenue, mainly federal funding and donations. If government had recorded the money the way our office and many other private firms believe they should have, last year's revenue and surplus would have increased by $191 million. This doesn't mean that government would have had additional cash, though. This money has already been spent on projects such as building hospitals and maintaining roads. Ultimately, we want to ensure that government's financial statements reflect a true picture of the province's financial health. This was the 3rd year in a row that we differed with government on how this money should be recorded. The Public Sector Accounting Standards Board of Canada provides independent standards for all provincial, federal, and municipal governments to follow for their financial statements. However, government interprets the standards differently than others in certain areas, which reduces comparability, understanding, and usefulness of its financial statements. That said, we have worked through and resolved many other accounting issues with government over the past few years and look forward to doing the same with this issue. The next piece we'll look at is the interesting story that the financial statements tell. For those of you who are not adept at understanding financial statements, the statements go well beyond the bottom line and provide valuable information about the province's financial health and performance. For example, page 20 of the report talks about the $157 million government paid to parents as a result of the teachers' strike last year. That amount was just a bit less than what government saved in teachers' wages. Another example is around the sale of surplus assets. Last year, government generated $135 million in revenue by selling off some of its assets. Significant sales include Burke Mountain and Steveston Secondary School. As an aside, we are in the very early days of a separate audit looking at some of government's land sales. The financial statements also look at government debt. Total debt at last fiscal year end was $63 billion. Much of it was used to build assets such as hospitals and roads. In the future, though, government will pay its lenders back through taxes and fees. Did you know that 68% of government's $44.4 billion in annual expenses goes to health and education? That leaves about $14 billion for all of government's other functions. Finally, government has signed $102 billion worth of contracts for things like coastal ferry services, SkyTrain construction, electricity purchases, and road and bridge maintenance. We note how government's contractual obligations have increased over the past few years, due in particular to contracts signed by BC Hydro with independent power producers. We also explain in the report the distinction between contractual obligations and debt. These are just a sample of the points we highlight in the report. Further sections talk about how capital assets are accounted for, the fact that dividends received from crowns are not recorded as revenue, the information on pension plans, and what credit rating agencies look for. Let's look at the third general area in our report, that of a new accounting standard which requires a more complete estimate of the costs to clean up contaminated sites. These are the costs of cleaning up the environment after a site, such as an abandoned mine, is shut down and the person or company responsible for the contamination can't be found. Previously, government accrued a liability once they assessed the site. Under the new standard, government now completes a more comprehensive estimate of what it will cost taxpayers to clean up contaminated sites. These costs disclosed grew by $273 million over last year to $397 million. These are not new costs, but now government has to estimate and record them. We should note that this is only for sites that the government has accepted responsibility for cleaning up, so any liability arising, for example from Mount Poly, is the responsibility of the mine operator and is not recorded by government. Finally, over the next few years, 8 new accounting standards will come into effect. The first of these are in fiscal 2018. Government needs to consider and address these changes well ahead of time to determine their possible impact on the statements. That concludes our summary of this report. Thank you to all of the 150 plus government organizations for their participation in this work, and thanks to you for joining us today. To read this report and our other publications or for more information about our office, please visit our website at www.bcauditor.com.